What happens when you neglect a beloved franchise for decades at a time? Eventually, the fans will just take care of it themselves. However, that's not allowed, and nothing escapes the notice or the reach of the long arm of Nintendo. Another Metroid 2 remake is just another casualty in a growing list of games that Nintendo has taken down. But just like cockroaches, gamers are a hardy bunch and are not easily dissuaded by the law or legality. That's right, we're still here. We're on version 1.5.2 now. We got new artwork, new game modes, including the coveted randomizer mode. You might be wondering, I haven't played Metroid 2. Should I just start with AM2R? Probably. Metroid 2 is not what most people think of when they think of a Metroid title. It's a little bit sluggish, it's monochromatic. Some people claim there's a more sinister vibe to the game. It's a no-map having claustrophobic experience. AM2R gives quality of life updates and takes some liberties in adding things and readjusting zones. So to answer the question, yeah, start with AM2R. There is certainly value in playing the original Metroid 2, however it is an aged game that many may find not to be so palatable.
The galaxy is
in flames.
AM2R is a fairly linear game. You arrive onto a scene, exterminate some Metroids, and suddenly a Deus Ex Machina occurs. In this case, it's a seismic shift that will continually occur as your Metroid body count piles up. These seismic shifts drain away previously impassable lava pools. As you become aware that these shifts are tied inextricably with progress and dead Metroids, you realize that you need to start keeping in mind where these lava pools are to continue further into the bowels of SR388. Hold on a goddamn second. Metroid 2, the original, had lava pools that gated things just like AM2R does. AM2R is being faithful to the source material, perhaps. I just think that this was a missed opportunity to fix some of Metroid 2's shortcomings that AM2R inherited. You're not using your movement upgrades or weapon upgrades to access new areas. Normally, wherever the lava recedes, there will be a place to use said upgrades. However, the point is that this area is gated off completely and only are we allowed to go there when the developer permits us to. It would be like getting a double jump ability, but instead of using the ability to access a new area, a door unlocks after. You get the ability, and then the first screen past the locked door you can use the double jump. It doesn't feel as organic as it could. Gating progression this way just feels awful and lazy, which is a shame because there are many clever level designs that the developer has in the game to help subtly point out secrets to the player and gently push them in the right direction. Just a few notable examples. Early on you run into a room where a Robo Chozo statue fires at Samus, but the projectile disappears instead of colliding with what appears to be the wall. This is a great clue to investigate where the projectile went, and whoa, wouldn't you know it, there's a missile pack hidden in here. This kind of design makes the player's brain swell with pride. Another example, there are spikes everywhere in this little passage, but what is this? Some spikes are missing here. I wonder if that signifies anything. Oh, and it does. Again, I just love this. One more. Here you have a pile of rubble, which is a marker for the player to stop and shine spark up. We're in a junkyard, factory, or something along those lines, but this is the only bit of scrap that we see. We also got here by speed boosting through a wall. Sure enough, another missile pack. There are more of these too, but these are just my favorites. I'm highlighting these to make a point that the game developer has a pretty good knack for level design. Indeed, they even went on to work on Ori 2, Will-O-the-Wisps, as a level designer. Congratulations. Which is why it hurts all the more that the same care was not taken for the, I guess, overworld. You have these individual rooms that are great, but the whole is somehow less than its parts. Two game modes seem to be a salve to this. The first is a New Game Plus mode, which does away with the lava-gated areas. Now you can roam around freely, to a degree. I played this mode and it didn't really resolve the issue because now while I can access a new area, I don't have the necessary abilities to navigate the new zone, so I still end up going the same route I would otherwise. I should clarify that New Game Plus mode does not mean you start with your gear from a previous save file. you start with nothing. I think the crux of the issue here is how zones and areas interact with each other were not planned out all that much. Most new zones are bottlenecked by a single entrance. Later on, you get a fast travel of sorts that can ferry you around, but if you want to go from Zone A to Zone B, it is normally just in a straight line. Individual screens are well tuned, but how zones interact with each other are not. Then there is the randomizer mode, which I don't think was meant to be any kind of answer to the linearity of this game. Rather, it's just a popular mode for Metroidvania titles. It would be a grave disservice for me to speculate on AM2R's randomizer because while I have beat the game a grand total of 3 times now, I still don't have a solid bedrock of where every item is, and I think if you want to get the most out of a randomizer, then you really need to have a solid foundation of where things are and how all the mechanics in the game operate, and how those mechanics can help you sequence break and get further with less. For those that have played the randomizer and are familiar with it, I would be interested to hear what you think of it. Getting back to level design, there's just one other issue that I take personal umbrage with, and that is that there are these spots that I'm going to call artificial speed zones. These are basically shortcuts in a room to get through it quicker, generally with minimal effort, and these generally avoid all enemies on screen. When you discover them, it can be kind of underwhelming because you might at first think you've discovered a secret, but alas, it's just a speed boost for speedrunners. You can find these type of shortcuts in a lot of Super Metroid ROM hacks as well. Actually, some of the Super Metroid speedrunning community are in the credits for the game, so they might have had some input in regards to this feature. I don't really care whose idea it was, but I feel these are generally not in the spirit of speedrunning. Part of speedrunning is solving the game. Solving the game is routing for the fastest speeds, how to handle each screen of a room, how to avoid rooms, etc. If the developer puts these speed zones in, then that aspect of speedrunning gets lost. Further, it's just my own opinion, but if something is going to be faster, it should require better execution of game mechanics. It should also look cool. There is a problem though, because some of these shortcuts do make sense. Indeed, some of these shortcuts do exist in the original game. Like early on, there is a mountain that you can morph ball under to quickly go through. In AM2R, we are given a visual clue, and in Metroid 2, it's just a hole. I think in the case of Metroid 2, this was more to remind the player that, hey, you guys do have morph ball, and also it was kind of a mercy because movement in Metroid 2 is a little bit janky, and that's mostly due to screen real estate. So where do you draw the line? I'm not sure. But I do think such shortcuts should be used sparingly, and care should be taken that they make sense. For example, firing a missile here is faster than going around, but this just doesn't really feel right. It almost feels like someone said, you know what, I want to save 8 seconds in my speed run. I don't want to go around that corner. That corner is superfluous chaff for casuals. So let's put this here, and it needs to cost a resource to get through here so it feels like you're making a decision. I really do feel that some of these shortcuts are egregious, but honestly, they're not a huge deal. Samus feels capable. I don't want to say powerful, because there are instances where enemy HP just does not make sense. I should state that I've only played this on hard mode and later on fusion mode, which is basically extra hard mode with X parasites. Disappointingly, the higher difficulties mostly just increase enemy HP and damage output. That's not my favorite way to do difficulty, and because of this decision to scale difficulty this way, some of the HP on these enemies are just questionable. Take this Chozo Janitor bot. It takes 2 super missiles to drop. These things are annoying as hell, and in some areas are spaced out just so every time you're about to get Shine Spark status from your speed boots, they knock you out. Just for the sake of comparison, an evolved Metroid with hardened carapace takes 2 supers to down. These janitor bots, no matter the difficulty, should not be so hardy, and their placement should not be so that they constantly deny you speed status, unless they are going to drop fast, so that the player is forced to quickly dispatch them to gain speed. In fusion mode, and again I believe in hard mode, that just isn't going to happen. Sure, it's a higher increase in difficulty, and so you have to live with the consequences of that decision. But this just makes the game frustrating, and thematically it just doesn't make sense for a janitor bot to be as tough as a Metroid with hardened carapace. I'm okay with janitor bots still doing massive amounts of damage in higher difficulties, but their HP should have been reduced. Metroids need to be exterminated. They are a danger to galactic peace. I gotta say, I like killing Metroids, but I think it was a mistake to have every single Metroid have its own isolated arena. These arenas usually in their own way modify the fight, and should in theory change how the dynamic of the fights play out. The fights themselves are admittedly underwhelming. I mean, this is the threat to the galaxy. This is what the Federation could not handle, so they had to hire a bounty hunter to do it. Sure, these Metroids are still evolving, and Samus does take on more fearsome evolutions later. It just feels like there's this weird balancing of Samus needs to be powerful, but these Metroids also need to actually seem a significant threat. We already know Samus prevails because this title precedes Super Metroid, but we don't see any kind of real struggle here. You know, there is an iconic scene in Super Metroid where the Metroid larva sucks the soul out of a hopper, turns the fool to sand. It is an intense scene and really highlights the danger and damage just a single Metroid is capable of dealing. It would have been nice to see them interacting with or bullying other creatures. If they are such a threat to the galaxy, then surely on their own homeworld, they would have absolute, unchallenged, supreme dominance, right? I think it would have been great for a gaggle of Metroids to even interrupt a boss fight. While the Metroids are largely underwhelming and not always fun to dispatch, the other bosses, which are not Metroids, are generally a pleasure to fight against. My personal favorite is the Mecha Torizo. I just wish the second phase of the fight the music shifted into something. Perhaps what I feel the most important aspect of any Metroid or Metroidvania title for that matter is controls and movement. Samus controls a bit wonky, like a fucking brick actually. I know that some people criticize Super Metroid for Samus having floaty movement and controlling like a boat, but I could not disagree more. I find Super Metroid's movement to be tight and clean. I'll take that over Samus's immediate terminal velocity drops in AM2R any day. I'm not trying to contrast and or compare these two titles, I'm just stating a preference. AM2R has multiple choices for controls. You can rebind buttons, which is fantastic. There are options for diagonal aiming, and you can choose to bind locking your current aiming angle to a button and still move around. I appreciate this so much because one, it gives the player more options and allows players to find a comfortable button layout, and two, I detest when developers conflate diagonal aiming and locking your movement into a single bind or button. I can stop moving on my own accord. I don't need to be anchored in place to aim diagonally. I find that when developers do this, it's sort of an admission that the movement in their game is slippery. A great way to fix this is having diagonal aiming stop your momentum and movement, which is exactly what happens in Super Metroid. There is no run button, which I personally dislike. In fact, until you get speed boots, your fastest movement is actually going to be in Morph Ball, which I find to be quite sad because I find myself oscillating between wanting to look cool and see Samus's sprite and wanting to move fast and being a ball. I do have my own issues with Samus's sprite in this, and with Samus's sprite in GBA titles. I feel like she's hunched over, has scoliosis. I really like that erect Terminator stance that Samus has in Super Metroid, but regardless of this personal dissatisfaction, I would still like to see Samus and not the Morph Ball sprite. I'm not sure why, but this is almost a reoccurring problem with Metroidvanias. In Symphony of the Night, the fastest base movement is backdashing, which really sucks because Alucard's sprite is gorgeous and backdashing just looks ridiculous. It's also hard on your hands after a while. Of course, you don't have to choose speed, but in AM2R's case, being in Morph Ball is also advantageous because it shrinks your overall hitbox, conferring just one more advantage to being in ball form as opposed to running around on two legs. Anyways, let's get to movement. The movement in this game is mostly what you would find in GBA titles, though certainly it shares some similarities with Super Metroid for obvious reasons. You've got your high jump, space jump, speed boots, shine sparking, wall jumping, and bomb jumping. Wall jumping in this title feels finicky. I suspect it's because you need to have a collision with the wall, or maybe it's just the fact that Samus drops so quickly, or possibly both. To be clear, I do prefer a wall jumping mechanic that requires some kind of mechanical execution, so again, the type of wall jumping you see in Super Metroid and AM2R. I know that some people find this kind of wall jumping painful and would rather have something akin to Mega Man X's wall kicking, but I find that tying wall jumping to mechanical execution to be extremely satisfying, and it increases the skill ceiling for the game. One big problem I ran into was that I couldn't jump, turn, and fire quickly. I don't know why this is, but if I quickly input a jump, then mid-jump, about face, and fire, what happens is my input gets eaten. I had a similar issue like this with Castle in the Darkness, and man, is it frustrating. Unfortunately, when this happens, it also means that I need to do testing because I don't want to falsely accuse a game of shitty inputs unless it's true. So again, I am using a DualShock 4 controller. I ended up having to run DS4 Windows to get the game to recognize the controller properly. I have a feeling that this might be the core of the problem. I tried with my controller. It ranges from inconsistent to not registering inputs at all. Perhaps this is something on my end. If I was using an Xbox controller, maybe I would have not had any issues at all. I would actually be grateful if anyone that has played this with a different controller could weigh in with their experiences. I know some people may say, just buy an Xbox controller. The thing is, I'm not really a fan of that controller. You think I like having to deal with all the aggravations that come with owning a DualShock 4 controller on PC, even in the year 2020? So let's try with keyboard. It ranges from consistent to getting it every time. Wall jumping actually feels a lot easier. And my core problem with wall jumping is that it appears Samus must collide with a wall to wall jump. I know it sounds like of course that's how it should work, but by making Samus have to collide completely with a wall instead of just having a certain collision range, kind of like a hurt box that extends just a bit beyond Samus' sprite, makes the overall wall jump mechanic tighter in a strange way that I can't really put into words. But it is something that I feel when playing the game. Wall jumping up a straight vertical climb is not a problem, but if I need to make more nuanced, precise wall jumps between smaller ledges, then it becomes an issue in a way that it never has in Super Metroid. But again, this is AM2R. This might just be a case of I haven't spent enough time with the game to get the wall jumping timing down completely. Despite some of the shortcomings, the movement still feels pretty great. Combat is mostly satisfying, though I do have to mention that the plasma beam in this game is hilariously underpowered. I think the idea is that the screw attack should be the end-all be-all, and if that doesn't suffice, then hell, there's still power bombs or super missiles. But really, the plasma beam should be melting 90% of all enemies, especially the mechanical units, like these saw blade bots, which do incredible amounts of damage on fusion mode, and have an enormous health pool. Really, it's a bit obscene. Anyway, you get plasma beam late game, so it really should obliterate nearly everything. Late Metroid evolutions and up obviously should not be affected by it, but your run-of-the-mill mobs should explode just by Samus looking at them. While playing through on Fusion mode, a friend mentioned to me that really the best way to play this game was on its normal difficulty. Enemy HP is not so high as to be annoying, and you won't find yourself questioning why Chozo Roomba bots have military-grade armor plating that can withstand actual antimatter blasts. I know I keep harping on that, but it really just feels terrible. Some might say that the Chozo were sufficiently advanced that even their most mundane drone bots had incredible resilience and capacity for destruction, but only a fool would make such an assertion. The difficulty scaling in AM2R is really lackluster, and the game suffers for it. I believe that I would have had a much more pleasurable experience if I had played this on normal. In fact, during the course of this video, I was forced to go back to conduct further tests on certain things and decided I would start a new save on normal to see if there was an appreciable difference. Of course there is. Samus is a monster on normal. You get strapped with missiles much faster, you may as well be a tank, because you're not going to die and you're going to deliver death to everything. For my own personal taste, normal is a bit too easy, but then hard and certainly fusion mode are tedious in their own ways and are not quite what I envisioned for harder difficulties. Don't get me wrong, I can forgive a failure in difficulty tuning. That is more on me for seeking out harder difficulties. Some games are best played on a particular difficulty. Higher difficulties do have a way of, more often than not, revealing flaws and breakdowns in game design. Technical difficulties I can also overlook, given the history of this game's development, the stops, the starts, the changing of the guard between developers, the decentralized nature of the fine folks working on it. I'm sure some of these guys, it's their first foray into programming, and I don't exactly expect them to be able to root out why my DualShock 4 controller randomly gobbles up inputs, or if it's even a priority, or if they even know that this is a problem. What I can't look past is the base movement, the monotony of the Metroids, and the linearity. Base movement just doesn't quite hit the mark for me, and my experience was unfortunately confounded further by my inputs evaporating. I don't think the movement in this game is objectively bad. The game is designed with it in mind, it's just a personal preference. I don't want the movement changed. I cannot underline this point enough. The movement is just not for me. Make no mistake though, movement is rich in this game, and depending on where you fall on the movement will determine whether this game is great or just good. Something I didn't touch on but will briefly is that later evolutions of Metroids have this massive hurt box that you cannot phase through or roll under. You either completely clear the Metroid by going all the way around it, or you don't. You may find yourself in a position where you've taken multiple hits before you've even landed. If you're really unlucky, you may find yourself in a corner, panicking as your health depletes to nothing. This damage doesn't feel fair because you don't have time to recover, because you're still falling through the Metroid. There is no defensive recourse. Even in a situation where you've made landfall, you'll find that you do not have enough invulnerability frames to escape the orbit of death that a Metroid can possess. To be clear, I don't want the Metroid's damage output reduced, but I think the way knockback and iframes work could be changed to make the fight feel better for the player. Currently, it seems you get knocked back the direction the Metroid is facing, which can be a problem. Possible fix would be that you make the knockback occur opposite the direction the Metroid is facing. However, sometimes Metroids will turn around on a dime, which could cause you to get locked into even more damage than you can currently in game. Possible fix to that would be to make the knockbacks go further. However, this is also a problem because it will not always work and it could be disorienting for the player. So what you might possibly have to do then is just split the hurt box into two portions. A face box that always pushes you in the direction the Metroid is facing, and a body box that pushes you the opposite direction the Metroid is facing but doubles your knockback. This way you have time to clear the Metroid, land, and retreat. I should also note that you're probably going to have to increase iframes, otherwise you may get knocked back and almost clear the Metroid just to get hit again. I think increasing the iframes just a little tiny bit would be beneficial in this case, as there are times where the Metroid's face can hug you nearly to death, and having just a few frames to jump above the Metroid's face to reposition would be nice. There's also a situation where the Metroid will leap. It would have been satisfying to be able to roll under this attack. It could be a high risk, high reward situation where you need to correctly time your roll. The reward being that you can reposition quickly and continue fighting the Metroid as opposed to hiding and waiting your turn. Possibly you could even hit the Metroid's weak spot on his back if you're fast enough. Just let me roll between those legs. There is a precedent for this, you know. And you can't tell me this wasn't a missed opportunity. It just makes sense, right? It doesn't have to be that you can just slide underneath the Metroid whenever. It would need to be predicated upon the Metroid leaping and timing it correctly, otherwise you get crushed by the Metroid's bulk. Since we are talking about Metroids, we should mention the Queen. There's a musical component to this fight that I love. It's a small, simple touch, but it's great. I wish it had been taken a step further with each corridor that is blown open, the music gets a new instrument added, or the overall score changes noticeably into a more drastic direction, or something along those lines. But even in this limited capacity, it's a wonderful touch. The fight itself is fairly simple, but that does not mean it's not fun or engaging, because it is. It is satisfying to blast the Queen in the face with your massive payload over and over again. The Queen and Mechatrizo made me wish there was a boss rush mode so that I could revisit them easily. Alas, there is not. Another digression, Ice Beam doesn't really do anything towards Metroids. I'm kind of indifferent towards this, but thematically speaking, it probably should do something, given that ice is an iconic weakness of Metroids, even if it's just to freeze them in place briefly to allow Samus to reposition safely, or slow down an attack. Hey, remember that morph ball under the leg idea? Throwing an Ice Beam out into a morph ball to clear a slightly slow leap would feel extremely gratifying to pull off. But again, I don't really care one way or another. Feature creep is a real menace that we must be vigilant against. One other final thing before I get back on track is that this game does expand the lore and story and does it in a non-invasive way. What I mean is there are lore logs that you naturally get as you fight new bosses or enter into new zones. You can also retrieve these off of dead Federation fellers. I appreciate this because it allows me to determine how much I want to get invested in the story, which is not at all. This is a far superior method than having a robot or AI or whatever the hell it is in Fusion hold you hostage while spewing exposition and patronizing you, Samus, the most badass bounty hunter in the galaxy, the bounty hunter that the Federation had to reach out to for help against an existential threat, which the Federation gave no assistance in, basically sent Samus on a suicide mission, and not only did Samus take care of it, she delivered the last Metroid to captivity, where it had a promising future in bettering civilization. That is until Ridley rolled up into Ceres Station, which then prompted Samus to go on a revenge murder spree of Mother Brain and her space pirates, and then blew up planet Zebes. Or, well, I guess Mother Brain had a dead man switch that activated a self-destruction sequence upon her death. But either way, show this woman some damn respect. Alright, here is something that might be controversial. Linearity is not inherently bad. That said, linearity is typically a death knell for a Metroid or Metroidvania title. Linearity means you cannot do a Suitless Meridia. It means you cannot do a Hell Run into Norfair. It means your options for replayability and exploration, as well as player expression, are reduced and limited. Sure, you can have an intended route by the developer, but you should strive for multiple routes, mechanics interacting in ways you could not foresee, and sequence breaking. Ideally, you would have routes you are completely unaware of being discovered by your player base, but that is a massive and unfair request of a free fan game that's made by a shadow ghost council that is on the run from the law. I mean, it's even a tall order to ask Nintendo. I don't think they could make another game like Super Metroid if they tried. The problem here is that Metroid 2 itself is a linear game, and so by being faithful to the original, for better or for worse, we are inextricably tied to and suffering from the sins of the father, or I guess mother in this case. That's really what it boils down to. This is a remake, hence the name, another Metroid 2 remake. Not a reboot, not a remix, a remake. And it is a great remake, although there were some liberties taken. It was also a needed remake. Metroid 1 had its remake with Zero Mission, Metroid 2 now has AM2R and also Samus Returns. What about Super Metroid? Super Metroid is a perfect game. It does not need a remake. Do not touch Metroid 3. So how does AM2R fare outside of this context? You know, against other Metroid and Metroidvania titles? If you get something free and as competent as this is, it's hard to be mad or disappointed. That does not mean the game is immune from criticism. It does mean that we should give the game the respect it deserves and judge it on the same grounds as if it were a fully published game. I think that in the land of Metroid and Metroidvanias, it is above average, but it's not exceptional. I have a lot of love for this game and I appreciate the people that have worked on it to make it a reality. I would absolutely recommend AM2R. It's a fun game. If you like Metroid, you're going to be right at home. If you like Metroidvanias, again, you're probably going to enjoy this title despite its flaws. AM2R is a bit linear. The Metroids over time become more of a chore to deal with than a threat to be respected, and the difficulty scaling is not as fine-tuned as it could be. However, it's a good effort, but it felt like there was a lot of potential that just wasn't really met. I think some of that is because the developer probably felt like they needed to stay on the straight and narrow with the source material. Of course, there are liberties that have been taken, but the idea really is to remake Metroid 2, update the movement mechanics so it feels closer to Zero Mission or Fusion, and give it actual color. Although, if you prefer to play it like it's 1991, there is an option for that. Obviously, this game was made with love and care. Its continued development is a testament to the love of the Metroid series by fans, which, by the way, the source code was recently dumped, so if you feel like you could do something better, maybe you can. Anyway, this is a wonderful game that deserves to be played, so go play it. That corner is superfluous. Oh shit.